The LA Kings are still quiet as we were moving closer to the biggest weeks of the offseason. We're talking trade possibilities, current key Kings players on the roster, and possible holes to fill on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years. Also, one of the co-hosts of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's in its 19th season of putting out shows, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. We are now just 4 days away from the NHL draft here in Los Angeles. We are 7 days away from the start of free agency as we continue to wait and see what the LA Kings will be doing in putting together the Kings roster for next season and beyond. Coming up on today's show, we're going to look at a couple of potential trade targets for the Kings. We'll look at a member of the Kings' current roster from this past season and project them going forward. And we'll tell you about the Kings looking to change their position for the upcoming NHL draft. I did want to pass along a quick note about a trade today involving the other SoCal NHL team. The Anaheim Ducks shipped out 24-year-old forward and former first-round pick Trevor Zegras to the Philadelphia Flyers for player Ryan Poehling, the third-line center of the team, a third-round pick in 2026 and a fourth-round pick in 2025. Zegras is not as established as some of the players the Kings might be interested in trading for, but he's young and still has a lot of potential, and certain teams are always looking for that. I still thought it was a pretty small price to pay for a guy who's clearly very gifted and still just 24 years old. I don't know how this is great as far as the Ducks are concerned, not that I care, but I also don't know that Trevor Zegras is a great fit for the city of Philadelphia. We shall see, but so far our LA Kings have been very quiet to this point, and to me that does seem to point to the team going after some pretty big names in free agency as they're looking to obviously see how the dominoes fall in terms of signing any free agents. So they're waiting to see what's out there before they possibly look to re-sign some of their own free agents like Vladislav Gavrikov, Andrei Kuzmenko, and Alex Ferrier. Of course, those players are players the Kings could sign between now and the start of free agency next week. That hasn't happened. So again, it feels like the Kings are looking to see if they can take a big swing at some of those free agents out there, and then maybe they fall back on trying to sign an Andrei Kuzmenko or something like that. We shall see, but that's my read on how things have been quiet for the LA Kings to this point. So how about we talk about a couple of potential trade targets for the LA Kings, and we'll start with a veteran forward that we have talked about before on this show. He's a player that I talked about the Kings maybe looking to pursue ahead of last year's trade deadline. That didn't happen, but maybe veteran forward Jonathan Marcheso of the Nashville Predators is still a possibility. Now, what would make Marcheso an attractive trade target for the Kings? Well, he's a right shot. He's a right winger. And that's, of course, just what the Kings are kind of looking for, a top six winger that, has played in some big games and in some big positions. Marcheso played for the Predators' top line along with Steven Stamkos and Philip Forsberg last season. He played in the top six when he was with the Vegas Golden Knights, a former Conn Smythe Trophy winner with Vegas when they won it all back in 2023. He was the MVP of the playoffs that year. So obviously the Kings are also looking for players that can make a difference in playoff games, and Jonathan Marcheso certainly has done that in the past with the Vegas Golden Knights. So what's not so attractive maybe about Jonathan Marcheso? Well, his goal numbers did drop in half last season from the season before. He had a career-high 42 goals 2 years ago, but last year down to just 21. Now, 21's not bad, but it's certainly nothing compared to 42 goals the year before. That's what the Nashville Predators were looking for, somewhere in that ballpark, and they did not get that. Now, his point total wasn't horrible, 56 points, but it was 13 fewer points than he had the previous year, and it was the fewest total points he's had over the past 4 seasons. Now, despite the drop-off in his numbers, He was still good enough to be third on the Nashville Predators in goals scored and second in points. He was also, though, a minus 29. That was second worst on the team. And he had just 4 power play goals last season while playing on the team's number 1 power play unit. He is 34 years old. He's going to turn 35 in December. He is signed for the next 4 seasons at a price of $5.5 million per season. Now, that's a bargain if he's a 42-goal, 69-point producer, which he was 2 years ago. But when you're scoring 21 goals and 56 points, not quite as good. So the question is, did Jonathan Marcheso just have an off season, or was his season 2 years ago a career year that he's likely never going to approach again? Did his numbers maybe drop off because new team, new teammates, took him a while to get used to it? It did seem like later on in the year, he kind of came on a little bit. So maybe that's some evidence that that could have been the case, that he just was joining a new team with new players to get used to, new system to play in. Maybe that was part of it. Maybe it wasn't. That's something that teams looking to possibly trade for him are going to have to determine. Now, what would it take to get him from the Predators? Well, Nashville's in this weird situation where it doesn't seem like they exactly know which way they want to go. Before last season, they made some huge moves, took some big swings, and acquired some really high-profile players like Steven Stamkos, like Jonathan Marcheso, but it did not work out. And they went from being a playoff team the year before to missing the playoffs this past season and probably being the biggest disappointment in the NHL from this past year. And now they're trying to figure out, did we just have one bad year and can these players turn it around the next year, or do we need to see this as it was a year ago, a failed experiment that was ugly, and we need to hit the eject button on some of these players and kind of start over? It seems like they're leaning towards shedding salary and moving off veteran players like Jonathan Marcheso, which is likely part of the reason why his name has come up as a player that could be moved this offseason. Now, Marcheso does have a full no movement clause, and he could kill any potential trade if the destination is not to his liking. Would LA be to his liking? I think there are some good reasons why. I think the most obvious one is this is a guy who's used to playing in the playoffs when he was with the Vegas Golden Knights. The Kings are likely a playoff team again. Obviously, a playoff team from a year ago. They've made the playoffs 4 years in a row. So he wants to get back in the playoffs and play in some meaningful games as his career is starting to get to the point where it'll be winding down relatively soon. He's obviously very familiar with the Pacific Division, having spent most of his career with the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, he would be moving his family for a second time in 2 years, but I think all indications are that he would be receptive to being traded and getting a fresh start elsewhere. And it probably didn't help that Marcheso made some headlines last season when he criticized his head coach, Andrew Brunette, and then the GM came out with a strong supporting statement in favor of the head coach. I do think that Marcheso's age and his contract could make the asking price for him pretty reasonable. We'll see what Kings' new GM, Ken Holland, if he'd be willing to look into Jonathan Marcheso. I think that he is worth a look. I think there's still enough tread on the tire that he could be what the Kings are looking for if they can't get a guy like a Brock Besser, and maybe they feel like it's an upgrade from Andrei Kuzmenko. I think that Jonathan Marcheso is a guy who does check off some boxes for the Kings, and he'd be worth looking into. On the defensive side of things, should the Kings not be able to or not are willing to re-sign Vladislav Gavrikov, one name that has been mentioned is another player that has had his name in trade talks, and that is defenseman Bowen Byum. Now, he's a left shot D-man playing for the Buffalo Sabres, known as a good puck mover, former Stanley Cup winner. His rookie year with the Colorado Avalanche, he appeared in 20 playoff games and got his name on the Stanley Cup. It's a nice way to start your NHL career. Last season for the Sabres, he played in all 82 games. He played on Buffalo's second pairing, 7 goals, 31 assists for 38 points. He was a plus 11 on a bad team. Now, he also played on the Sabres' second penalty kill unit. Currently an unsigned restricted free agent. He's coming off a 2-year deal that was paying him $3.8 million per season. He's 6'1", 205 pounds. He's appeared in 246 career NHL games, after the Avalanche made him the 4th overall pick in 2019. Byum is very experienced for his age. He's going into his 6th NHL season. He's only 24 years old. Now, would he be a step down defensively from Vladislav Gavrikov? Yes. But he's young. He could be part of the Kings' solution now to fill a hole and could be a guy that could play for them long-term, which is what you're worried about when you sign Vladislav Gavrikov to a long-term deal. So there's still a lot of productive years left for Bowen Byum. As far as a question of fit, would head coach Jim Hiller be comfortable with a guy like him on the second pairing along with a Brandt Clark? I mean, it seems like Hiller's more comfortable having a veteran player with Brandt Clark, which we saw with Joel Edmondson. But I don't think Bowen Byum is I mean, if you're going to go out and get him, he's your second pairing defenseman on the left side, not Joel Edmondson. So maybe the fit might not be there, but again, a good young player who gives you more offense, has the potential still to grow into, being more of an NHL pro. Again, it's a give and take with the defense to offense. He's more offensive, not a total offensive player. He's still responsible defensively, but he's not a defensive defenseman like Vladislav Gavrikov. He's a little bit more of he gives you a little offense and he still plays some defense. He's kind of he's not an offensive defenseman. He's not a defensive defenseman. He's kind of a little bit well-rounded in both sides as far as his offensive and defensive game. So again, it would not be as good defensively, but it would give you a little bit more offense. So Bowen Byum of the Buffalo Sabres, possibly a trade candidate for the LA Kings if in fact they cannot get Vladislav Gavrikov to resign, or if he doesn't want to resign with the LA Kings. All right, up next, we're going to look ahead and back at the season that was for Phillip Danault. That's next on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, whether you're snacking at your desk or on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios is a snack that works as hard as you do. Get snackin' and get crackin' with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. We continue to take a look at a member of the LA Kings roster from a year ago and project to what next season and beyond could hold for that player. And today we're going to take a peek at LA Kings alternate captain, Phillip Danault. The 31-year-old veteran forward just wrapped up his 4th season playing in LA, appeared in 80 of 82 games for the Kings this season, scored just 8 goals, which was down from 17 the previous season, which got a lot of attention from fans. I think unfortunately for Danault, he really raised the expectation of Kings fans when he scored a career-high 27 goals his first season with LA. And he did come close to 20 in each of the following 2 seasons. No question, though, that putting the puck in the net was not something he did very well this past season. Now, he's not a big goal scorer, but he should be better than just 8 goals. Now, the point production, however, was exactly at his career average, 43 points, thanks to his 35 assists, which was 3rd on the team, only behind Andrei Kopitar and Adrian Kempe. Matter of fact, Danault ranked 6th in the NHL for assists 5-on-5. He was behind players like Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, David Pastrnak, and this year's league MVP, Nikita Kucherov. That is some serious company to be a part of. And assists can sometimes be a little bit misleading when it comes to secondary assists, but 28 of Danault's 35 assists were primary assists, meaning his direct pass led to a goal being scored. Now, for most of the season, Danault centered the 3rd line, played alongside Trevor Moore and Warren Foegele. He also saw time on the Kings' number 1 penalty unit and the Kings' number 2 power play unit. Very responsible defensive forward and a solid 3rd line player. And I think probably the best word to describe Phillip Danault is reliable. You know what you're going to get from him night in and night out. Deno actually, I thought, was one of the few Kings players that took a major step forward in the playoffs as compared to his regular season. Deno had 2 goals and 6 assists for 8 points in 6 playoff games this year. That, of course, included a memorable game-winning goal with 42 seconds left in Game 1 of the playoffs, helping the Kings beat the Oilers 6-5. Probably his other most memorable moment this season also came against the Oilers. You might remember late regular season game. There was that ridiculous incident between Darnell Nurse when he cross-checked Quentin Byfield in the back of the head while he was laying face down the ice. In between the periods, Patrick O'Neill does the interview with Phillip Danault, and he made some headlines when he said, quite accurately, quote, "They have their B squad and they are trying to hurt us," end quote. That was a great line from Phillip Danault. And I thought spot on. Deno will be entering his 12th NHL season this coming year. He is expected to be the Kings' third-line center once again. He's got 2 years left on his contract. He's making $5.5 million per season. That is a bit pricey for a third-line center if you look purely at his numbers, but he does do a lot of things well that might not get noticed in terms of just his pure stats. I do think Phillip Danault could be an attractive trade piece, especially if a team is looking for to add a smart veteran bottom 6 center, a team that's probably, looking to bolster their lineup as far as the depth goes, for a playoff run. But the only way I could see any kind of a trade possibility with Phillip Danault is if somehow the Kings had an awful season. They were looking to clear cap space, and Danault was looking to join a team for the playoffs. He does have a 10-team no trade list in his no trade clause, but that's very unlikely to happen. I think we can all be pretty confident that the reliable Phillip Danault will be centering the Kings' third line once again this coming season. I did mention last week that friend of the show, Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty, posted on social media what he had heard about Tanner Jano when he said, quote, "Hearing that Tanner Jano won't be returning to LA next season and will hit the open market on July 1st, end quote." Now, that quote suggested to me that it was Jano's decision to test free agency. I did see another report which phrased things a little differently, saying Jano was not offered a new contract. Now, that report would lead me to believe the Kings were not interested in re-signing Tanner Jano, which would be a surprise to me. Now, I don't know if one is more accurate than the other, and it could possibly be a bit of both. Now, maybe the Kings decided not to offer Jano a contract after hearing what he was looking for as far as his demands, and then he could have decided that he wasn't returning to LA when the offer wasn't what he was looking for. So I don't know exactly what the truth is. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but I would think it would be a mistake for the Kings to not try and re-sign Tanner Jano. Again, don't know exactly what he's looking for. If it's a ridiculous asking price, then sure, you walk away from it. But I can't imagine that he would be looking for any kind of big money. So a little bit disappointed if the Kings have decided to not try and re-sign him. I thought Tanner Jano served his role very well with the Kings last year, who were obviously looking to get a bit tougher. We'll never know how effective he could have been or what kind of factor he could have played in the playoffs against the Oilers, unfortunately, because he got hurt. Led the Kings in hits pretty much every game, finished with 211 hits on the season. If Jano is in fact gone, then the Kings are losing their most physical player. And people have asked in some of our fan feedback shows, who could possibly play that role, either from outside the organization being brought in or maybe on the roster now. I talked about Samuel Helenius. I think he certainly has the size. He's trying to develop the attitude and the experience to try and take on that role. He was second on the team in hits with 150, and he only played like 60 games this year. So if you project that over 82 games, then he's not going to get 211, but he could be somewhere in the ballpark maybe. If we're just talking purely about dropping the gloves and playing that kind of role, I did wonder if Tanner Jano is gone, could that open up an opportunity for Jeff Malott, who came on late in the season to fill in for Tanner Jano. He was injured. I did forget to mention Andre Lee as well, who we saw for 19 games early in the season. He's a guy who's pretty physical. He's got pretty good size. He will drop the gloves if he needs to. Certainly doesn't have the experience of a Tanner Jano, but maybe Andre Lee could be in the mix to try and fill the skates of Tanner Jano if, in fact, he is not brought back. So I know that, filling that role, certainly not as high profile as what the Kings may or may not do with Vladislav Gavrikov, if in fact he does leave. But, Tanner Jano and that role, still a part of the puzzle I think the Kings are going to have to figure out if they're going to take that next step forward. I think they would benefit from having a player like a Tanner Jano there in the bottom six, probably the fourth line to play that kind of role. Maybe it's in the organization. Maybe it is Samuel Hellenius. Maybe it is Jeff Malott. Maybe it is Andre Lee. We'll have to see. Or maybe the Kings look to bring in somebody from the outside this offseason. All right, we've talked about who the Kings might draft with the number 24 pick, but what if they don't have the number 24 pick? We'll talk about that next. You're on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in the game with your friends, and you can all check it out wherever you are. You could be getting a sunburn at the beach and still be checking out the FanDuel app. You can track your favorite matchups with the app. It's got new daily promotions that are fun and are entertaining to bet on the games. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and even regular season games feel like must-watch events thanks to FanDuel. Whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're a part of the action. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We do have some Kings notes to pass along. We have been talking about the Kings and who they could take with their first-round pick, the 24th pick in this week's NHL draft. Well, there's also the possibility the Kings will not have the 24th pick. Kings insider Zach Dooley reporting that he was told by Kings director of amateur scouting Mark Yannetti that the Kings would like to move back in the draft and pick up a second-round pick in exchange. If possible, the Kings don't have a second-round pick this year. This would not be a surprise if the Kings were to pull this off, because this is something that Mark Yannetti loves to do. He's done it before, including last year, where it worked out very well. You may or may not remember the Kings had the 21st pick last season. They ended up trading spots with the Montreal Canadiens. They moved back to 26, and they add a second-round pick in return. The Kings then were still able to get the player they wanted in Liam Greentree at number 26, and then use the second-round pick to select goalie Carter George. And those are the two biggest prospects the Kings now have. So to say that move worked out is a bit of an understatement. So we have been talking about who is targeted around the number 24 pick for the LA Kings. But it's very possible that they might not stay there. Clearly, Mark Yannetti, if he has his way, will not stay there. So all we can do is talk about with the information we have now. That's the 24th pick, but we should maybe prepare ourselves that could change. And so some of the players around number 24 we've been talking about may not end up being picked by the Kings after all. But hopefully, if that happens, it'll work out as well as it did a year ago. One other thing worth mentioning from the Zach Dooley report, and you should read the entire article at lakingsinsider.com, but Mark Yannetti confirming that he is, in fact, still completely in charge of what happens with the Kings at the NHL draft. He's been on the job for 18 seasons, but he has a new boss in Ken Holland. And so you never know when you have a new boss exactly if you're going to be doing the same things that you had always done. But at least for this year, Yannetti told Zach Dooley that he is completely in charge of which players are picked, if he wants to move back in the draft, trading draft picks, everything that pertains to that will be in Mark Yannetti's hands. I should correct myself, not trading picks. I'm talking about trading positions, moving up or back in the draft. That would be his responsibility. If the first round pick, though, were to be traded in part of a trade, now that is what part of Ken Holland's responsibility is. Mark Yannetti would not have any role in that. But as far as what is going to go on Friday and Saturday, with whatever picks he has at his disposal, he will be the man in charge of making the player selections or moving back or forward in the draft. Speaking of the draft, I did see an article in The Athletic about each NHL team's best and worst draft picks over the last decade. I was curious, so I took a peek. A little surprised by what I saw when it comes to the LA Kings. They said that the best Kings draft pick over the last 10 years was defenseman Mikey Anderson. Okay. But they said the worst pick was forward Alex Turcotte. And look, Mikey Anderson was a 4th-round pick, 2017. He's played in 345 games. That's the most of any draft pick over the last decade. He's obviously a very good defensive defenseman playing on the top pairing, so I don't have a problem with that. I think you could argue that Gabe Vilardi and Quentin Byfield are more impactful players than Anderson when it's all said and done. But Mikey is not a bad pick, especially if you're just taking into account what they've done to this point in their careers. But I don't really get the Turcotte selection as the worst. I would say Rasmus Kupari was a worse pick than Alex Turcotte. Now, Turcotte was the 5th overall pick and Kupari was 20th. But Turcotte has only 4 fewer goals than Kupari, who's played in 117 more NHL games than Turcotte. And I think more importantly, Turcotte is still an NHL player. He's going to be on the Kings roster next season playing in some sort of a role. Kupari isn't even in the NHL anymore. He's left to play in Europe. So it was pointed out that Turcotte was taken ahead of several impactful NHL players, guys like Cole Caulfield, but there were other players of note that were drafted after Rasmus Kupari too, like Keandre Miller, Isaac Lundestrom. So I would say Rasmus Kupari is probably the Kings' worst pick over the last decade. Matter of fact, when you look at that 2018 draft for the Kings, it was pretty awful. Of the 7 players the Kings took, only one of them is currently in the NHL. That's Akil Thomas, who was taken in the 2nd round. And let's be honest, he's barely hanging on at an NHL spot at this point. The 5 other players taken after him never played and likely will never play an NHL game. Only one of them is still in North America other than Thomas, and that's goalie Jacob Ingham, who played 24 games for the Kings ECHL affiliate, the Greenville Swamp Rabbits, last season. We talked about the countdown to the draft and free agency. How about the countdown to the Kings' first preseason game? That would be exactly 90 days from today on Monday, recording this show. The complete preseason schedule has been released. The Kings will take on the Anaheim Ducks in the Empire Classic in Ontario, September 21st. That's the first preseason game. The Kings will then head to Vegas to take on the Golden Knights on September 23rd. The next night, they're in Anaheim to take on the Ducks on September 24th. September 27th, the Kings will face the Ducks in Bakersfield. September 30th, it's the Kings against the Utah Mammoth in Boise, Idaho. And then October 3rd, the Kings will take on the Mammoth in Salt Lake City, Utah. And LA will close out the preseason with their only game in LA. They'll be hosting the Ducks at Crypto.com Arena on October the 4th. The first day of the NHL regular season is October 7th, but we don't know if the Kings will be participating on opening night or not, or who their opponent would be in their first game of the season. But we're already counting down to the start of the preseason, 90 days away from the recording of this show. Also, some news to pass along regarding the NHL's Rookie Face-Off coming up in September. Last year it was held in LA. It featured the Kings and 6 other NHL teams: Ducks, Sharks, Kraken, Avalanche, Golden Knights, and the Utah Hockey Club. This year, according to reports from the folks over at Mayor's Manor, the event will be at Great Park Ice. Yeah, Great Park Ice. I've been there in Irvine. And it's only going to feature the Kings, the Ducks, and the Sharks. Colorado, according to the report, is going to host a separate rookie face-off with the Golden Knights and the Utah Mammoth. According to the report, the event was a little bit too big for the facilities that were being held at, so they basically split it in half with rookie face-offs in Irvine with the Ducks, Kings, and Sharks, and then the other one in Colorado with the Golden Knights and the Utah Mammoth. So rookie face-off will still be in Southern California this year, but cut in half and will be in Irvine instead of El Segundo. Did want to mention, before we close it out here, I will be attending this week's NHL draft here in LA on Friday and Saturday. If anybody's out there and wants to say hi, reach out, let me know, email, social media, whatever. Really excited to be covering the draft here in LA and bringing you some extra content on the draft as well. Any of you that are interested in the extra content that I'm putting together, we have a new email address specifically for that. It's lakingsextra@gmail.com, lakingsextra@gmail.com. If you've already emailed me saying you're interested in the extra content, you don't need to email that email address as well. I've got you down, but anybody that's interested in some Kings extra content going forward, we're going to kind of kick it off with the NHL draft this weekend. Send me an email, lakingsextra@gmail.com. All right, that's going to do it for today's show for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On the Kings every day. Coming up this week, we're going to have a special interview with longtime hockey reporter and Kings special correspondent Scott Burnside. We're also going to have our final look at what LA Kings players will be available, where they currently are drafting with the number 24 pick in the NHL draft. And then Friday and Saturday, we'll have shows. Part of it will be covering the NHL draft for the LA Kings, and we'll also mix in our fan feedback shows as well. So a fun, busy week coming up here on Locked On LA Kings. If you want to stay connected to the show, you can email me, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. Always welcome to post your thoughts on each show you're watching if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section. Stay connected with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.